Good morning, everyone. My name is Shane McElroy, and welcome to all our participants on our webinar this morning on taking action around grass deficits that have arisen since the long period of dry weather across parts of the country, particularly in the east and south of the country that we've experienced. We have an excellent lineup of presenters for the webinar this morning, and I know everyone will get a lot of valuable information and insights to the situations that have arisen on farms and the actions that can be taken to stay in control of feed budgeting on your own farms and to keep production on track. The format of the webinar today is to have two short technical presentations from our subject matter experts in Teagasc and in Tirlán, followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. And we'd encourage each of you on the webinar today to get involved in the conversation by submitting your questions to the text number that you'll see on the screen. And we'll endeavour to go through as many of these as possible during the Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be available afterwards to all participants. We'll run through approximately till 12:15 today with the two 10-minute presentations first, and then we'll go through your questions that have come in by text to 086 180 3947. So as you can see from the agenda on the screen, first up, we're delighted to have Teagasc Head of Knowledge Transfer for Dairy, Joe Patton, who will take us through the current grass and fodder position across the country, including the wide variances that are being seen across different parts of the Tirlán milk supply area. Secondly, then we'll have Willie Darmody, technical specialist on feeding cows, who will discuss the straights and specialist feeds available to meet needs of farmers across our area. And just to say it again, I'd encourage everyone to get involved in the conversation today by sending in your questions by text message to 086 180 3947. And if you would include just what part of the country you're in and as much detail as you can about the scenario on your farm that you'd like to get a little bit more information on. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Joe Patton from Teagasc.
Thank you, Shane. Good morning, everybody. So my job this morning is to really just give an update where we're at in terms of grass availability, some of the issues around projecting forward, maybe where we'll get to, hopefully, if we do get the rain that's promised, and maybe give some perspective as to what things might look like over the next few weeks. So look, thanks for the invite to come and speak, Shane, and also just acknowledge the material and the figures put together from our own team in Grass 10 and Pasture Base as well, who are keeping a good close eye on the situation daily. So look, nobody on the call, I suppose, be with me on the call if we didn't recognise the issue that's out there in terms of grass growth. You can see on the chart there on the map, depending on where you are in the country, it's quite sticky from a grass growth perspective. Generally speaking, like each of those figures you're looking at there is a sort of an average for the county, but there's big ranges within each county actually in terms of growth rate. So even looking at figures yesterday, Shane, for a group in County Meath, there was a range of from 60 back to 10 almost in growth rate, depending sort of an east-west divide, even in one county. So, but in a general sense, things are tight. To give some perspective, look at the sort of expected growth rate this time of the year, sort of for the first days of September, is usually going to be sort of 50, somewhere between 50 and 60, kind of in and around that, which is enough growth really that if you're stocked at something like a cow to the acre, you're sort of you're building grass on the farm. As you can see on the chart there, people are at, in some places anyway, they're less than half the expected growth and even no growth at all on some farms. So that's where we're at. Look at, and really driven by soil moisture deficit, up to 50, you definitely see it. After 50, it's definitely see a check in growth. Up at 80, there's no growth really at all. And that's really what's been seen. And even in our own farm down in Johnstown and Wexford, where we had an open day this week, there was growth rates at the moment are down sort of in the 20s down there. So that's where we're at. So look at, that's where we're at. I suppose, look at, we know the range is there and everybody can see where they're at for their own farm, and the fact that the lack of grass, we're really, our target would be to have sort of 750 on the farm in terms of farm cover, which would be higher than you would have in the summer. So building autumn grass up to maybe 1,000 kilos in mid-September. That's just not going to happen this year at all. And I think maybe one important point, Shane, is just that, even there's yellow rain warning for tomorrow and for Sunday, but even with the rain that comes, like the chances are, like really, even, you know, for particularly for the highly stocked farms, it is unlikely that growth will exceed full grass demand for the rest of the year. I think that's the important point, really. So what I mean by that is that if you're stocked at sort of 3 to the hectare, generally speaking, you're talking about a demand of 50, and normal growth rate for September would be, if you got 50 through the month, you'd be doing okay. So really, like, it means that we probably, for heavily stocked farms, chances of seeing growth that will exceed your demand is very limited, I'd say, for the rest of the year. So that kind of means even if we get rain over the next few days, and a good amount of rain, possible that some silage feeding and some heavy concentrate feeding is going to be needed for a good chunk, maybe for the rest of the grazing season, actually, which is, we need to be prepared for that, at least for those heavily stocked farms. Just an estimate, I know Willie will come back on some of this in a while, but estimate based on some farms we're looking at, maybe in the right tight on the eastern seaboard, maybe that have already been feeding silage for a few weeks now at this stage, and maybe taking that idea that you'll have to feed forward even with if growth recovers, like it's going to add up to something like 600 kilos of dry matter extra being used for supplementing over that time, which is kind of 2.5 tons of silage over and above the normal. And I think for those, if you're putting a figure on it, you'd be saying 3 ton of silage per cow in and around that is kind of what would need to be replaced, which is chunky, like for farms that are feeding that long, and that can't go unbudgeted for, I suppose. So really have to urgently have a look at where the winter feed is at. So a guesstimate, I suppose, at this stage is sort of 2.5 ton missing from the normal budget. But look, our fodder survey in July would have shown that on average the country had a sort of a 20% surplus in silage, but really in the east and southeast that was more like 5 to 10%. So that probably means some farms on the call are likely to be short going into the winter. But look, now is the time to look at that and do something about it. So okay, just move on, Shane. Thanks. Yeah, so look, here's just the blue line there is basically your 5-year average for growth rate. So your rolling 5-year average. You can see from across the year where you have obviously high in summer and then tapering off from mid-September onwards. And also 2018 is included in there as well, as it's a grey line, okay? And just wanted to show this because I think, you know, I talked to a few people during the week, and the idea that, you know, when rain comes, we're going to get this burst of growth that we would have done in 2018, which is fair enough. Like, we do remember it was great recovery in 2018, but just to make the point that if you look, there's the rainfall for Moore Park for 2018 that John Maher presented this the other day to our own advisors, and look where we're at there in terms of growth, in terms of rainfall from sort of late July, mid-August onwards. There was the guts over 100 mil of rain over that time. So the point there is that the drought, I suppose, in 2018, while we all remember it, it finished earlier than it will this year. And even with that, you know, that recovery and growth in autumn of 18, we got back to the 5-year average in growth rates, even with a lot of rain recovery in August, which we haven't obviously got this year. It got back to the 5-year average. It didn't exceed the 5-year average. So the expectation will be that we're not going to have growths in the 70s. I wouldn't imagine. Day length is what will limit it. So look, don't be expecting turnaround miracles, I suppose, in September, and plan for the feed that's going to be needed instead. It also means too that, and it's just maybe make the point on the fertilizer, that look at whatever for the finishing dates in 2 weeks' time, that's going to be the finishing date this year as well. There's no prospect and probably no justification for any talk of a change to the extension of a deadline or whatever else. So whatever we'll come to that in a second, but based on the figures from 18, even, you know, there was no additional benefit of extending the deadline relative to the 5-year average. Just go again, Shane, please. So yeah, look, this might be more like what we're looking at for those of us that remember 1995 was even more severe maybe than 2018, and that's the growth rate from 95. Again, these are Moore Park figures, and you can see from a prolonged late summer drought and recovery in rain maybe into later into September, the growth rate sort of peaked at around 27-28 kilos. So maybe 30 kilos of growth. So look at, just make the point again, it shows again that, you know, we're later than, it's not comparable to 2018 when we're looking at a big recovery late on. We're past that term in terms of time. So really, I think the focus has to be now about getting a sort of a rotation established. It's probably going to be around the 30-day mark, and supplementing along with that to try and get some grass back on the farm. But we won't be building cover to any great extent, but on heavily stocked farms by the looks of it. Okay, Shane. So yeah, look, on the fertilizer I mentioned a moment ago, these are just responses for fertilizer spread at different dates in the year. So obviously day length and temperature are big factors in the response that's likely to be got. You can see there in August, the response for every kilo spread in August was this is in a normal year with normal rainfall levels. So at the start of the month, applying the different levels and what the responses are. So in early August, the response is sort of over between 25-30 to 1. So for every ton of fertilizer put out, you're getting 30 tons you're getting, for every ton spread, you're getting 30 tons of grass dry matter back. It's more like less than 20 to 1 in September, which is kind of where we would be now with our remaining days left for September, and obviously into October. Then getting late into September, early October, the dry matter response is less than 10 to 1, which is just uneconomical. Okay, so, and obviously too, there's a risk of end losses to the environment. So we're not looking at a situation where fertilizer dates are going to change. It really depends on farm situation. Now, if fertilizer has been applied already, or we're up to date on fertilizer and we get rain, there's going to be mineralization after the dry weather. There's going to be mineralization of nitrogen in the soil. You're going to get a kick from that. But if no fertilizer has been put out over the last few weeks and there's rain imminent, then you would go with your normal, sort of your normal rates, kind of in and around that, somewhere 25 kilos, I suppose, or in and around that for the remaining application. But we're not going to be loading on much extra N in the expectation of a big spike in growth in September, which we're just not going to really get, and that's it. Okay, so yeah, look, what we're really saying then is that, in a normal year, funny to say, it can be a struggle to meet the grazing targets of 1,000 kilos by the end of the month of September. Generally speaking, a lot of farms, I fully accept and take the point that August and early September is a time when things tend to be quieter on farms and things are ticking along, and maybe sometimes the targets aren't just watched maybe very tightly, and on other farms are watched very tightly and very successfully. So there's a range there too. But look, at this year, it's 1,000 kilos is off the menu for most people. If we got to 750, we'd be happy enough by the end of September. It's a compromise position, I suppose, which will give us kind of pre-grazing yields, not that usual heavy autumn grass that we're used to maybe, but pre-grazing yields of maybe 1,500-1,600, and maybe supplement going in along to keep the farm growing along with a good green base on it. I think one key point here actually is, and it's something we possibly need to come back to as a reminder maybe later in the year, we do need to protect closing covers because grass will be needed for fresh cows next spring. I'd have a bit of a concern, Shane, that what will happen this year is if we get somewhat recovery in growth and farms are greened up again, and we've got a high milk price going into the last days of October and into early mid-November, and we've had farms that have been feeding for a long time, the temptation will be to keep cows out and graze off everything basically and leave no grass for the spring. We have to be very careful on that one, because if we remember in 2019, it was really having good covers ready in the spring was a big part of the recovery on farms from a feed point of view. So don't skin the place out is the message there, but we have to just close the farm at a normal cover rather than extending it too much. Okay. Yeah, so look, this is the real world stuff, I suppose, and all that data I'm showing you from pasture base, that's all obviously farm data too. So people doing their covers and posting them in every week to see where the average figures are at. But this is kind of where the future farms are at. You can see the average farm cover there for last week at about 500, so about 200 behind target. Growth rates ranging there from sort of no growth really at all up to maybe sort of 60, which would be kind of normal. Okay, so the range is huge, even within county, as you can see there. But farms that are on the lower end of the scene, as you can see there, there's lots of silage going in and lots of meal going in as well to prop up the performance. And as you can see from the figures there, in most cases, that for a sort of good quality spring calving herd, compactly calved, in and around that 1.65, 1.7 of milk solids would be roughly where the target should be. And you can see in most cases there, people have propped up their herds with the adequate amount of good quality supplementation and have kept them moving along. Obviously, with growths of 5 and 10, you have no choice but to do that. So there's good figures there, but look at the growth rates are where the problem obviously is. But 1.7 of solids is kind of where you'd expect herds with good compact calving to be at this stage, and a range there, as you can see. You know, obviously grass intake is going to be low. It's going to be down at 6 kilos or less for in some farms, and then it's silage, basically 6 grass, 6 meal, and 6 silage is kind of the rule of thumb. That's where a lot of those farms would be at. Okay. Okay, Shane. Yeah, so look, this is the tough one, I suppose, the demand, and on some farms where there's a significant issue in terms of already starting to eat into winter feed. Now is the time really to take an action in terms of, and I fully take the point again, and it's the same sort of argument or ding dong every year about getting rid of cull cows earlier to solve a feed problem. But just remember, a small number of cows got taken out now at this stage, your high cell count ones, the ones that are always those niggly cows that nobody likes milking. I suppose it's time, if there was a time to get rid of them, it's now. Move them on and sell off those surplus animals, because a small number taken out early will have a major effect over the, you know, it could be the difference in having an extra week's silage in the yard next spring for the whole herd, believe it or not. So that's the way we'd be looking at it anyway. You know, there's an option for some people, maybe just not first in some maybe in the next couple of weeks, maybe from mid-September onwards, we'd want to be watching, maybe doing milk recording, and if there's very low yielders or, you know, young heifers in particular, might be worth drying those off if you're holding on to them, and sticking them on an out farm or something like that where they can be fed relatively cheaply. That really, if you're in a severe situation, that will be an option maybe in 2 weeks' time or something like that. Just one note, maybe that, you know, I think I was asked a couple of times about this during the week about once a day milking to reduce demand. Just to put a figure on it, look, at once a day will probably reduce your demand by something between 1 and 2 kilos of dry matter per cow. It's a relatively small change in intake. And there's a couple of things on that. It takes time for that intake effect to come through. So over the space of 3 or 4 weeks, it'll take 3 or 4 weeks for that to come through. It won't really amount to a major change in demand. And one important point too is that when you're restricting cows that are on once a day, the chances are that you might get a bigger drop in yields than the expected 20%. It could be closer to 30%. So I don't think once a day is the option. So look at, there we are with our fertilizers. We mentioned, if there's, you know, over the next 2 weeks, if there's rain coming, and you apply as normal, basically whatever's remaining on your allowance, you don't go loading very heavy applications, and then it's really a case of using your watery slurry after the date to boost your supply after that. Okay, so I think we'll move on from that. Just to conclude, really, just one quick point here, actually, something that we're seeing on some farms where milk dropping significantly, maybe not on the future farms, but on some farms we're seeing, you know, herds probably not being fully supplemented, even though grass has really disappeared. And just make a quick point as I'm finishing here, Shane, on this diet A and diet B, where maybe we're overestimating or being a bit wishful thinking on our grass intakes, are a couple of kilos below target. We will end up dropping our yields back from sort of 1.6 back to more like 1.4 kilos of solids, simply driven by intake. So there's no point in having it in our heads that we're given 10 kilos of grass when the cows are only eating 8. We will lose significantly on that. And I always think it's an interesting one for a lot of farms we'd be talking to. There's a reluctance to take out some culls early for fear of losing milk, but at the same time, there's an acceptance of losing milk from the whole herd by not supplementing them adequately in a pinch period. So look, what we would be saying, keep the 6 and 6 and 6 in mind if you're in a situation, 6 kilos grass, 6 kilos of meal, and 6 kilos of silage if needed in that situation, and aim for at least 17 up to 18 kilos of dry matter even this day of the year. Otherwise we're going to lose, I'd say, on milk, and maybe use some figures on that coming in a second. All right. Okay.
That is great, Joe.
That's it, yeah. So yeah, sorry, Shane. Yeah, that's where we're at. So look, I think that's the way so the main points there is, look at that. I think even if grass recovers, there's going to be it'll recover to the point where it'll probably match demand over the months of September and into October. Try and aim for maybe if when we do get a recovery in growth, try and build sort of the 750 on the farm as quick as possible to get a bit of grass and a bit of green grass back on the place. There's nothing going to change in terms of fertilizer dates. So apply as normal if we get the rain, and there will be a lot of mineralization to drive on growth anyway. And just watch our supplementation that we are hitting our sort of 18 kilos of intake. Those are the main points, I would say. Okay.
Joe, thanks very much for that indeed. And look, really lots of really good information there. And I'm sure we'll create lots of discussion and some questions coming in, guys. So look, just remind you to get involved in the conversation by texting in to 086 180 3947. And if you can include as much detail as possible on the query around maybe feeding rates. There's some questions in there about feeding palm kernel and a few bits and pieces there, and nitrogen spreading and so on, Joe. So we'll come back to those in the Q&A session. Guys, just a really quick one before we move on to Willie, and it's around the impact that obviously grass availability and the feeding of cows can have, and what we have seen in Glanbia and in Tirlán as we are now, in terms of impacts on milk volumes week on week. So this is a swing of 1.9 million litres of supply. In other words, a drop in 1.9 million litres of milk over a 1 week period, particularly Kilkenny, Waterford and Wexford, significantly impacted, fairly impacted there in Meath as well, and Laois. So look, we know that, and you know it well, you can see it in your bulk tank volumes. If the cows are not getting intakes, and as Joe's covered well, we need to be up at that 17, 18 kilos of dry matter intake. If it's not there, the milk will not be delivered. And look, it's a year that, yes, costs are high, milk values are where they are, milk price is where it is, and there is margin there. So be a pity not to monopolize on that. And that is, I suppose, the result of the impact that can have from dry matter intakes and availability. We maybe talk a little bit in the questions as well, Joe, and just in terms of the relevance of feeding cows and feeding the right cows, and in terms of if there are passengers, it's especially if there's shortages on farm, let's not be carrying passengers and having them not producing for us. So look, we'll move on to Willie Darmody, our nutrition specialist in Tirlán, who I'm sure you'll be aware of at this stage. And Willie, will hand over to yourself just to go through some of the current on-farm scenarios that you're seeing out on the road and the solutions that can be to deliver on those. So I'll hand over to yourself, Willie. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Shane. Hello, everybody. So yeah, we'll have a look at a few scenarios, and we'll just set the scene first of all, folks, as to where we would like to be of a normal year, and we're far from being in a normal situation at this point in time. So normally this time of year, we'd like to have covers of 775 to 1100. Again, we're a long way away from that. If we're there at even half that, I think we're doing quite well at this stage of the year. We actually had no opportunity during August to build covers, and that has a big impact obviously then on September, October and November. And then as we go into November, and I think it was a point that Joe made, and it's a very, very relevant and valid point, that you do need to leave some grass there. Grass grows grass over the winter. So if you graze out too much, you won't have enough grass there in the spring. So that's why the closing cover has to be 550 to 600 kilograms of dry matter per hectare there during mid to late November. If it's not there, then grass will not get a chance to grow, and you will turn out cows to lower covers in the spring, or you may not have enough grass at all. So there's a balance to be struck between closing covers and having grass in the spring, and there's also a balance to be struck at the moment in terms of not having enough grass. And most people are fortunate if they have even 5 to 6 kilograms of dry matter grass in the diet at this time in time. So normally, and remember last year this time of year, spring calf and herd would be delivering 18 to 22 liters or so, feeding maybe 2 to 4 kilograms of concentrates. And again, we're a long way away from this scenario at this point in time also. So next slide, Shane, please. So again, just to, I suppose, reiterate some of the basics, it's all very fine having to feed higher levels of concentrate and dry concentrate buffer feeds, but forage needs to remain, again, a considerable part of the diet. The forage needs to be at least 50% of the diet. Any more than that, and you run the risk of digestive upsets, rumen upsets, and reduce performance then because of that. So at least 50% of the forage has to be maintained in the diet overall. Next slide, Shane. So we look at some scenarios here where people have a grass deficit and remedial things they've done to fill that gap. And again, when I talk about feeding grass silage, I'm talking about feeding surplus grass silage. So it's the surplus that was maybe left over from last year, or surplus bales that were taken out during the grazing season. I'm reluctant to start biting into pitted silage or winter reserves at this point in time, because you know, that's absolutely critical. You will need that. You never know what the back end could throw up in terms of, are we going to have an early winter? Are we going to have a late spring? So your pitted silage is absolutely sacrosanct, and anything that I'm talking about today is surplus grass silage. So in this situation, I mean, there is some grass left. You know, there's 6 kilograms of grass dry matter, which is broadly around 30 kilograms of fresh weight. We're putting in some silage, high dry matter silage, good quality bale silage, 6 kilograms of dry matter, approximately 25 kilograms of fresh weight, and we're feeding extra concentrate, you know, 6 kilograms of dry matter, 7 kilograms fresh weight, you know, and that could be a combination of maybe it's some feed in milking parlor, maybe it's some feed fed through a TMR, but it still has to be 6 kilograms of dry matter to build to that 18 kilograms figure that Joe highlighted there areas on as well. So this is not a bad scenario in one situation. I mean, there are people far worse and there are people far better. And there are a number of farms who will be dealing with this soil moisture deficit since the middle of June. And they have been feeding, you know, more concentrate and bale since then. So obviously this is biting in then into what silage they have heading into the winter. So this is a slightly different scenario to the earlier scenario we looked at. Again, some grass in the diet, some surplus silage in the diet, 5 and 5, feeding 5.5 kilograms of the parlor concentrate. And in this sort of situation, that could be a 14-15%. So it could be prime graze 14%, it could be lactation sustainer 15% protein feed. In this situation, we're including some soya hulls. So we're just spreading the concentrate load, and we're still building to that 18 kilograms of dry matter. So again, 6 kilograms of concentrate in the parlor, and then 3 kilograms of soya hulls fed through an easy feed, spread along by an easy feed barrier. But the whole key about this is that you need feed space, that if you're going to feed animals by an easy feed barrier, you need that feed space. So that's next slide then, Shane, please. Now in this situation, we have no surplus silage. So we've used up whatever surplus silage we have. We're looking at the pits, and we're reluctant to open pits. So again, it's trying to fill that gap. And in this situation, we're filling it with more parlor feed. We're filling it with more soya hulls, and then we're feeding some straw just to maintain that long fiber, keep cows chewing the cud, keep them ruminating, and trying to keep that forage ratio over 50% overall, using straw to do that. So it's 5 kilograms of dry matter of grazed grass. We're going to 8 kilograms fresh weight now of concentrate here, and again that could be some concentrate in the milking parlor, or some concentrate fed along with the soya hulls and straw. 4 kilograms of soya hulls and 3 kilograms of straw, building to 18 kilograms of dry matter. And soya hulls is a very flexible feed. I mean, a very palatable, a very readily acceptable feed by animals. You know, it's a high fiber product. It's a high energy product, and we saw back in 2018 how good cows and herds performed with soya hulls in their diet. So again, it's a key solution in this scenario. But as we see here, building in more parlor feed, building in more soya hulls, and then some straw just to balance back for long fiber there. Next slide, Shane. So this is scenario 3. So this is almost no grass in the diet. So this is quite a serious situation, quite a dire situation. We're having to feed some hay or straw or whatever is available at this point in time. So again, the grass is very small level here, 2 kilograms of dry matter, approximately 10 kilos of fresh weight. We have to feed some hay or some straw here, absolutely critical. Keep the rumen safe, keep the animal chewing the cud for proper digestion. We're feeding more concentrate. We're feeding 8.5, 8.7 kilograms of parlour feed here. We're going pretty strong on the soya hulls. We're up there to 4.5 kilograms of soya hulls. And then there's a small bit of silage here. There is some surplus silage, 3 kilograms dry matter or 12 kilograms fresh weight to build to that. So again, quite a serious situation, but it can be done. I mean, there are herds on this sort of diet at the moment, but it's all about getting in the long fiber, you know, getting in the straw or the hay, whatever is available, and feeding the soya hulls. And 4 kilograms or 4.5 kilograms of with that, it's a very, very safe feed, so that can be done. But again, in this situation, plenty of feeds place, and make sure that every cow can line up and eat at once overall, you know. So next slide, Shane. So there are other options as well. You know, beet pulp is available. You can feed, again, a very acceptable feed, a very palatable feed. You can feed 5, 6, 7 kilograms of beet pulp, just like soya hulls. Palm kernel is available. We would put a maximum feed rate on palm kernel of 2.5 kilos. Palm kernel is a high oil product, so it changes how the rumen works, you know, and you certainly don't want to overdo oil in the rumen. It can cause digestive upsets. It can cause some scouring, and it just changes how the animal digests. It changes the fermentation, and it can change how the milk how the butter fat is maintained as well, making the butterfat a little bit gloopy. There are other products available. Rolled barley is available. Maize gluten is available. But it's a case of anything really in a port of storm. There are wet products available as well. Brewers grains can be sourced. Trafford Gold can be sourced. But it's a case of figuring out what you need at this point in time, and then taking action then according to that. But a lot of people, I suppose, they'll take the practical and the convenient option of increasing the level of concentrate in the parlour first. Then they look and see, maybe I could feed some soya hulls. They'll put in the soya hulls, and then maybe as a last resort, if they've got enough surplus bales. And it's important now to do a stock take and see what's there and what isn't there. That surplus bales have a role to play, but I'd be very, very reluctant about opening up pits as a very, very last resort at this point in time. Next slide, please, Shane. Okay, so it's time to establish what fodder is there and what fodder is not there. And also, Joe made a very, very relevant point. There's a lot of silage has been consumed, you know, and you've got to allow for that. And so now is the time to establish what's in the pits, do the sum, and estimate what you're going to need over the winter. Know your stock numbers, know the length of your winter, calculate what's there versus your demand, and then if there is a gap to be filled, you know, source that silage if you can, source some hay, source some maize silage if that's available. Fodder beet may be an option on some farms, and then okay, some farms will they'll feed a few kilograms extra of a beef feed or a coarse ration, or just go with straight soya hulls, for example. And there's a very simple sum in that 1 kilogram of straw fed to cows in good body condition will save about 4 to 5 kilograms of silage. The same way with soya hulls will save about 4 to 5 kilograms of silage depending on the dry matter of that silage, and the same way an extra kilogram of concentrate will save 4 to 5 kilos. So between a combination of maybe an extra kilogram of straw, an extra kilogram of concentrate, you could well save 10 kilograms of silage per animal per day. Now the key here is to start early, to do this from the start of the housing period. 10 kilograms of silage spared a day is 30 kilograms over a month. It'll build to a substantial quantity then over time, you know. So 10 kilograms a day over a month is 300 kilos. Over 3 months is 900 kilos. So it's sparing from the start will allow you to stretch that silage into February or into March or into April as the case may be. But it's all about starting early. It really is too late doing that sum in January and thinking at that stage, yeah, I'm scarce of silage. What am I going to do now? The time to do that sum is actually now, and put those actions in place immediately. I think straw is going to be critically important to us this winter. It has a good role. It has a big role to play. There's nice quality straw around. It's readily available. There's plenty of good quality first cut silage and good quality early second cut silage. So there is an opportunity there to spare some silage with dry cows and dry stock and across all stock over the winter period. Again, just to reiterate it, you know, dairy cows require about 1.5, 1.6 tons of silage per month. I mean, an in-calf heifer, I mean, won't be too far off that, 1.3 tons of silage per month. Yearlings, roughly half that. Suckler cows, almost as much as a dairy cow, 1.4 tons per month. And then stores, approximately 1.3 tons per month. Again, know the length of the winter, and then do the sums by the amount of stock you've got, and then just work out how much is in the pits. But it really is time to do that sum now, and to put a plan in place then to avoid running short of silage next spring. So that's it. Just to reiterate a few points. It's all about dry matter intake. It's all about keeping cows performing well. We've seen herds that have maintained performance as very strong, you know, where they haven't seen this reduction, where they've maintained performance at 2 to 2.5% reduction week on week, which is very good. On the other hand, then we've seen herds who had significant drops, you know, where cows have dropped 4 to 5 to 6% per week. And those herds are really showing a big shortage in dry matter intake and intake overall, and they just need more. They just need more supplementation. They need more dry matter intake, because if not, those cows will slip away very, very quickly, and you won't have this long lactation that that's really required. And so estimate the silage and allow for that. Everybody needs a bit of surplus, and to put a plan in place then to supply that silage if you're that little bit short of fodder going into the winter. So that's it, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Willie, and Joe as well, and look, great information there on how to manage it, and Joe in terms of where things are at. Keep your questions coming in, guys. We've had a good number of questions in. We'll get to them now in a minute, and if we don't get to everyone's question, we'll pick up with you individually after the event. Just to call out before we get into the questions and answers, we have a number of we're coming to meet you face to face, and particularly in the areas most impacted. And as we saw across the Future Farms data, there's some areas much more impacted than others. We're going to have a series of events over the next 2 weeks, starting from next Wednesday evening in Enniscorthy. We're going to Dungarvan, Carlow, Louth, Monastervoice, Clonmel and Kilkenny then as well, to finish out at the end of next week. Look, this is a bespoke solution for every individual farm, and that's where we see there's real value in meeting you. That resource is available through your local business manager or through your branch manager today, but we feel it's valuable to get out and to give the information, and we'll have a number of expert speakers at those events as well. We'll have someone there from Teagasc to update and give a more detailed presentation than we've had time to do in our half-hour webinar this morning. So look, just onto the Q&A, guys, and we'll stop sharing the screen here, and we'll get people's faces back up on the screen. Is that coming through okay now, guys? So in terms of the first question, and I think it's one that's very typical of a lot of farms out there who are caught badly. So first, hasn't given their name, but they don't have any surplus and they're feeding their winter reserve. And maybe both of you might answer this, but Willie first. If we don't use our winter reserve, what do we do? Well, I think you've covered it fairly well, that there are other options that you can buy in. Now, they haven't given details of literally how much grass they have and so on. But if they have no other option but to feed their winter reserve, what do they do? Well, I think there are other options, Willie, just to go through it.
Yeah, there are, Shane, indeed. Yeah, and it's really, I mean, the options are maybe a little bit limited versus 2018, but yet there are still options, you know. And a key option is soya hulls. Another key option is palm kernel. Another key option is feeding more concentrate through the milking parlour. You know, straw availability, that's one. I would put priority on that one. You have to source straw. You know, cows have to chew the cud, they have to ruminate. if you've got enough straw secured, you can build in concentrate around that. But cows need long fiber to function. Unfortunately, I mean, there were some products moving off the continental Europe in 2018. There's none of that going to happen this year. You know, they've had their own drought, they have their own issues there. So back in 2018, there were things like straw pellets, like alfalfa around. They won't be available this year. So it's a case of maybe look locally. Maybe there's some rolled barley around locally. Maybe there's somebody with spare maize silage. Maybe there's some fodder beet around. Maybe there's some sugar beet in the southeast. Maybe there's some wet byproduct line around as well. You know, maybe some Trafford Gold or Brewers grains. But you know, often or not, the most practical and straightforward solution is, you know, a few extra kilos of coarse ration, a few extra kilos of soya hulls, you know, maybe a few extra kilos of rolled barley.
Yeah. Joe, probably any comment on that? Or?
Yeah, look, I think as well, I mean, I think the 6 weeks from sort of the early November to the 20th of December is a critical time for any of this. That there can be an awful lot done with straw, Willie, at that time of the year as well, when you have cows dry and whatever else. And I mean, look, if we leave cows free access to silage over the winter period, good silage, they'll eat 12 kilos, 13 kilos of dry matter. They probably only need 10 in reality to avoid overfeeding, right? So there's 20% there in terms of, if we have adequate feed space, there's nearly 20%. If every cow can eat at the same time, you can restrict a little bit more than you think at that point. I think there's that 6 weeks. It's almost like trying to get your winter feed saving done before Christmas and take Christmas off from the hassle, because in most farms this stuff creates extra work. So rather than saying, you know, I'll wait now until the January and see how it goes, I would be saying from the 10th of November, when things have settled, till the 20th of December, them 5 or 6 weeks is the time to really knuckle down. And that might be, as you say, Willie, that could be feeding straw for 2 days in the week. It doesn't have to be the same diet every day. Like, you can say, okay, well, what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to feed silage on Monday and Tuesday. I'm going to feed straw Monday and Tuesday and feed silage for the rest of the week. That type of, it's a bit grubby looking, and I'm sure there'll be nutritionists doing handstands thinking about not having the same diet every day. But it works in terms of, you can do an awful lot in the early part of the dry period. And if you restrict them at that point, there's still plenty of time to fix body condition and do all them things. I think the one thing we don't want to be doing is having a situation where we're trying to make all these adjustments in cows that are starting to spring down next year. Where we could be buying in silage, we don't know what the potassium level is it in, we don't know the mineral content of it. We have all these problems then with cows at the point of calving. So the best cow to save feed on, or the best animal to save feed is the cow that's just after being dry in her first 3 or 4 weeks, that's already in good body condition. And make a plan now to say, right, okay, I want to feed enough hay or straw or extra, whatever type of silage you get your hands on in that 6 weeks. Make the saving around that time, to me, and use, in fairness, if I get your point, Willie, we want to be making the thing, you know, you want to keep a reserve and hold as much of the winter feed as possible in place. But when someone is with their back to the wall, I think I'd be looking at feeding a little bit of that, if it's good quality, but making the thing of saying, right, okay, I need to get some dry enough, ordinary enough material, and it's as soon as the cows are finished, dried off. You might end up drying off a week earlier as well. That's another thing going to happen this year. Fellas are going to milk on because of the milk price. Be careful on, you know, don't be milking on cows that are doing 7 and 8 and 9 litres. They have to be hitting their time. They can be dried and put on on war rations basically for a couple of weeks.
And just to come in on that as well, Joe, we need the milk that's coming in to be of the quality that we can process and turn into the valued products. So things like lactose, things like somatic cell count, going to be highly relevant. Obviously, solids are going to go up, and the value of that milk is going to go up. But we need that to be coming in that's processable and able to turn into those products. Guys, a question from Pat in Meath: why is his milk urea high? He doesn't give in any more detail, but why the milk urea is high at the minute?
Yeah, we've analysed some grass samples over the last few weeks, and we're finding protein content of that grass of 25 to 30%. So even if people are getting only, you know, 5, 6, 7 kilos of dry matter, that grass is very, very high in protein. You know, it's effectively double what you'd see in a grass silage sample. So that's contributing the bigger amount of that protein, and that's you know, that's high nitrogen protein as well. So that's what's driving the high milk ureas there.
Good stuff. Joe, question I might send in your direction. Willie from Waterford is saying, how long will it take for grass start growing after the rain comes this weekend, and hopefully it comes, by God.
Yeah, okay, that's really down to where they're starting from in terms of soil moisture deficit as well, Shane. Like if you're sitting at a soil moisture deficit of 70 and you get 10 mil rain over the weekend, it's not gonna do a whole lot. But let's assume that for best case scenario where soil moisture is 50 and we get plenty of rain to bring us back into line, maybe back, we're back at a reasonable level of rain, starting from like a brown base, if you like. There'll be a lag of at least there'll be a lag of a week at least to 10 days before you really see something, and then the whole farm should come almost together. But even if it does, right, so that's bringing you into the 10th of September. Like best case scenario with loads of rain and a relatively green base on the farm, it's probably the 10th of September really before you see any sort of appreciable growth. And at that, maybe what the growth rate you might get to is around 50.
Only
so so like if you're stocked at 3 to the hectare, which a lot of people are, like a lot of the sort of most efficient dairy farmers are stocked kind of 3 to the hectare on the grazing block, that's enough to feed the cows grass and only grass and meal. So in order to get covers built, we're going to have to hold the cows back even after the grass takes off. We're going to have to hold them back for a week or so, at least a couple of weeks at least.
I hold them back from the grass and
let the grass build. So we're going to be, I think you're still going to be feeding silage for 3 weeks at least.
And that's key, I think. And a question that's quite linked to that. It's from Jimmy. He hasn't said where, but soil temperatures are high. Will this not help the grass growth in September and prolong the growing season?
It will, yeah, it will. But look, we all know it. You can see now, all your matches have come back from starting at 8 o'clock to 7 o'clock. They'll be back to 6:30 this weekend. And anyone who's, that's the problem. It's day length actually. Like we're only 20 days away from the autumn equinox. We're back to 12-hour days basically, and it's daylight is the problem.
Willie, question on palm kernel. Someone, haven't given their name, is feeding palm kernel at 4 kilos, and the cows are fine. Why is it 2.5 kilo max?
Yeah, and 2.5, I suppose it is a safe level, folks. 4 kilograms is a strong enough feed of palm kernel. I suppose the key to it then is to just make sure they're chewing the cud and ruminating, that the dungs are tight. The dungs haven't loosened up. Like as I said, it's a high oil product. Oil is a lubricating element within the rumen. It does upset rumen fermentation. It does wipe out rumen bugs. So just keep them chewing the cud. Keep a very, very close eye on intake. Make sure the cows are filling themselves. Make sure the dungs are tight and fine. It's probably a little bit on the extreme side, but it can be done with care. I stress that it can be done with care. But the general run of it is palm kernel is a 2.5 kilo feed rate.
Perfect. Willie, we're 2 minutes over time, but I think there's a couple more questions I'd like to get to, and they're very relevant to a wide audience. And then we'll maybe have to cut it there. But just in terms of Joe, the importance of feeding cows and which cows to cull is effectively the question around a bit.
Yeah. That's it. Look, that's the one. Without milk recording, you can't really tell. Well, you can, I suppose. The one that kicks you the most, you're going to cull her first anyway. But cows would want to be on their best behaviour for me around this time of the year at this stage. But look at it's high cell count. Millionaires. Chances are they're going to be. Some of them cows could be out of the tank for a week anyway with recurrent mastitis. You'd be saying they probably need to go. Your empty culls that are calved a good long time. Problem cows, really. Look, at the moment, it depends. Like if you're really backs to the wall and talking, like as you're saying, Willie, where winter feed is really an issue, and you're looking having to go out buy that, buy a lot of winter feed. You'd be drawing the line a bit higher. But like 0.8 of a kilo of solids or 0.9 is paying for the feed, extra feed at the moment. In and around, right? You're probably, if you're on 0.9 of a kilo of solids, which a lot of heifers might be coming into that level now, they're still probably paying their way. But in a couple of weeks' time, let's say, your earliest calved heifers that are sort of dropped away, there's probably 10% of them or whatever could be gone, could be dried and put to an out farm to let grass build for the rest of them for a few weeks, if you know what I mean. You mightn't even notice the difference in the tank, but definitely high cell count. And your lower yielding heifers that might be retained on the farm but graze tightly on an out farm or something like that to get some grass built up would be the thing. Just one quick point, maybe Shane, on that, like that for feed space, like I've seen on a few farms now where them those kind of more timid animals are standing behind the rest of the cows as they're eating their silage, and then they're going out to a paddock when there's only 6 kilos available. When feed space is tight, we have to be a bit creative. Like, there's nothing wrong, for example, with keeping half the cows in for silage in the morning and half the cows in for silage at night, and splitting the herd and moving them around. But I think, as Willie said, it's critical if we're relying on straw, and we're relying on straights, and we're relying on things that aren't grass basically to feed the herd. They need plenty of space. I think the more problems happen from lack of feed space than the formulation of the diet, to be honest. So that's critical.
Yeah. A couple more questions from Michael and Gory. If he's feeding silage at over 6 kilos, should he feed a higher crude protein nut? And Willie, maybe on that one?
Yeah, more often than not, if they're on say the 6 kilograms dry matter of grass silage, 6 kilograms of matter of grass, and 6 kilograms of concentrate, a 14-15% will cover that off very, very well, particularly in the light of grass being high in nitrogen and high in protein at the moment. Now, there are situations if people are going higher, like in that last scenario where we looked at where there was only 2 kilograms of dry matter grass in there. At that stage, you're looking at 18% protein feeds, all right, fed at 7 and 8 kilos. But more often than not, 14-15% will cover off that scenario.
Yeah, I think if you've one, I'd agree. Like, one good grazing if you have one grazing in the day, you're probably still okay at the 14-15. If you have full silage diet, you're going into higher protein. And just one other quick point on the urea, actually, that people worry about the urea this time of the year, about what effect it's going to have. There's really no evidence. Like, the cows are safely in calf at this stage. The problem with milk urea, if there is a problem with fertility, is more pre-breeding, or sort of at the point when you're right in the middle of breeding season. But if cows are safely in calf at this stage, milk urea is of 35-40 is not an issue from an embryo point of view, basically. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. And
the last question is 2 questions from Pat in Laois. Is the background nitrogen in the ground not sufficient? And he's calling out, as you called out, the low response in September, and he's also asking about what's the relative value of having grass in the spring versus using it in the autumn.
The background, and especially with high temperature and with a prolonged dry spell and high soil temperatures, when that gets rain, there will be significant mineralization. That's what we're saying. Don't go beyond what the norm, like, you're probably going to use your allowance for fertilizer. We're back 20% of nitrogen anyway nationally, which is no bad thing in some cases. But look, for the moment, you're using your normal rates or your 20 units or whatever, but that has to be on in the next couple of weeks. There's no point in leaving that till there's no point in thinking that's going to go on later. So the background end will drive a lot of it, but a small application and at normal rates would be probably beneficial. What was the other question? Was the relative value? It's worth, so having closing covers, keeping the closing covers on target, it's worth, it's worth at least 1.6, 1.7 times having it in the autumn than keeping it, leaving it over winter and having it for the spring. Think about it. What are you feeding in the autumn? You're feeding a cow on a herd average at that time of the year, because remember, we're talking about grazing this off. It's from the 15th to the 25th of November when the damage will be done. Herds are down to 12 kilos, maybe kilo of solid, something in around that, versus cows that are freshly calved that need high energy feed going into them from day one. I'd keep it for the spring for sure.
And that piece as well is, as you had on your slides, Willie, how long is the winter? And we just don't know. And so we have to plan for. We don't know if we'll still be needing that silage in April next year. So we just need to have plans, and that call out about having the fibrous feeds there, the forages that we need as the base diet. You can build on that then with the other straights and with the concentrates, but you need to have the fodder, the roughage sources there. Guys, we're 8 minutes over, and you've been great to answer all those questions. And apologies for, there's a few questions that we just didn't get to, but we're caught on time. We'll contact each of you individually to support on those. And we have our supports out on the ground. Look, there's Teagasc advisors, as you know well, and there's Glanbia business managers, branch managers out on the road, there to support at the end of the phone. Every farm situation is different, and it's important to get to the bottom of it for the solutions that were going to work for your farm. Willie Darmly, thank you very much. Joe Patton, really appreciate it. We have 6 events coming up from next Wednesday in Enniscorthy, Dungarvan, Carlow, Monaster Boyce, Clonmel and Kilkenny, and we'll come meet you face to face and as close as we can get to you. We'll have further detail on the presentations that we'll have a farm survey completed at that stage as well, and we'll have some insights from the future farmers involved. So look, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Important thing is to assess where you're at. If there is a shortfall on your farm, take action now. It can be resolved with the additional inputs of feeds. Don't feel that there's nothing you can do. Get on top of it, and it can absolutely be put in control again. Thanks very much to our speakers, and have a good rest of the day and the weekend, and safe farming. Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care.
Yeah.